Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I was always the good girl, straight A's, never stayed out late, helped around the house, you name it. My parents were strict but fair, or at least that's what I thought until everything changed during my senior year of high school. I met him in my advanced placement chemistry class. He was smart, kind, and mature for his age. We started dating, and for the first time I felt truly seen and understood. My parents approved of him because of his academic achievements and polite demeanor. We were careful, always used protection, but as luck would have it, one broken condom was all it took. I found out I was pregnant 2 months before graduation. My hands were shaking as I stared at the third positive pregnancy test. I knew I had to tell my parents. They had always preached honesty and family values. I thought they would be disappointed but supportive. That evening I gathered my courage and told my parents I needed to discuss something important. My mother's face immediately tensed up while my father continued reading his newspaper. When I finally managed to tell them I was pregnant, the silence that followed was deafening. My father slowly put down his newspaper, his face turning red. When he finally spoke, he demanded that I repeat what I just said. I tried to explain that while I knew the situation wasn't ideal, we could figure something out. This only made him angrier. He exploded, saying I had ruined my life and the family's reputation. My mother started crying, worried about what people would think and what would happen with college. I attempted to suggest taking a semester off and still attending college, but my father shut that down immediately. He gave me an ultimatum: either get an abortion or leave the house. When I tried to protest, he repeated that those were my only options and I needed to choose. I tried reaching out to my boyfriend, but his parents had already accepted a job offer across the country. They were moving in 2 weeks. He offered to stay, but I couldn't let him give up his future. We were both just kids ourselves. With no support system and nowhere to go, I made the choice I never wanted to make. The day of the procedure, my mother drove me to the clinic in silence. She waited in the car. I spent the next few months in a fog, graduated with honors, started college locally, and tried to pretend everything was normal. My parents never mentioned it again, acting like those weeks had never happened. Then came Christmas. My cousin, who had just had a baby, invited the whole family over. Everyone was cooing over the infant, passing him around like a precious treasure. I stood in the corner, nursing my punch, trying to keep my composure. That's when my mother walked over, bouncing my cousin's baby in her arms. She was squealing about how she couldn't wait to be a grandmother someday, wondering aloud how wonderful it would be. Something inside me snapped. Years of suppressed anger and grief bubbled to the surface. I leaned in close to her ear and reminded her that she had already had her chance. The color drained from her face. She quickly handed the baby back to my cousin and excused herself. I saw her crying in the hallway later, my father consoling her. That night, after we got home, my father came to my room. He berated me for being cruel, telling me how devastated my mother was. I fired back, pointing out the hypocrisy of calling me cruel when they had forced me to terminate my pregnancy by threatening homelessness at 17. And now my mother was acting excited about being a grandmother. He defended their actions, claiming they did what was best for me because I was too young. I called him out, saying it was about their reputation, not my well-being. The next morning I found my mother sitting alone in the kitchen, still in her robe. She apologized, admitting they should have supported me better. When I agreed with her, she asked if there was anything they could do. I told her they could start by acknowledging what happened, stop pretending it was just a bad dream, and stop acting like they did me a favor. Over the next few months, things changed. My parents started seeing a family therapist. My mother joined a support group for parents trying to rebuild relationships with their children. My father, well, he's still working on it, but at least he's trying. I'd be lying if I said I've completely forgiven them. Some wounds take longer to heal, but watching them genuinely try to understand the pain they caused, seeing them work to rebuild our relationship, it's a start. Last week, my mother found my old sonogram picture while cleaning. She had tears in her eyes when she gave it to me, saying she wished they had been braver. I agreed with her. It's not the happy ending where everyone hugs and everything is perfect. It's messy and complicated, like real life. But at least now we're dealing with it honestly, and that's worth something. After 20 years of working in the city's financial district, I finally saved enough to buy my dream property, a beautiful lakeside house with a private wooden bridge extending into the water. It wasn't easy getting here. I grew up in a small apartment, worked 2 jobs through college, and spent years climbing the corporate ladder while living well below my means. But it was worth it. This place was my sanctuary, my reward for all those sleepless nights and missed weekends. The property came with 5 acres of land, including a portion of the lake's shoreline. I specifically chose this spot because it was relatively secluded, with the nearest neighbor being about half a mile away. The previous owner had built a sturdy wooden bridge that stretched about 30 feet into the lake, perfect for fishing or just sitting there enjoying the sunset. I'd been living there peacefully for about 6 months when the incident happened. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I was in my home office finishing up some work when I heard voices coming from outside. At first, I thought it might be visitors who got lost, but as the voices got louder and more persistent, I realized something wasn't right. Looking out my window, I saw a woman and 2 kids, probably around 8 and 10 years old, walking across my lawn toward the bridge. They were carrying fishing rods and a cooler. I grabbed my phone and headed outside. I politely told them that this was private property and directed them to the public fishing spots about a quarter-mile down the shoreline. The woman barely looked at me as she continued setting up her fishing gear on my bridge. She dismissively replied that this was a perfect spot and they weren't bothering anyone. I repeated that this was private property and they were trespassing. She scoffed and claimed that all lake access was public property. I explained that this was my land and my bridge, and asked them to pack up and leave. Her kids were running up and down the bridge, stomping their feet and making as much noise as possible. The woman smugly told me that her children were enjoying themselves and accused me of being selfish. I tried reasoning with her one more time, explaining that there were better fishing spots just down the shore that were actually public, and insisted they needed to leave. In response, she pulled out a fishing knife and threatened me, warning that I would regret trying to make them leave. I backed away slowly and called the police. While waiting, I watched from a safe distance as she and her kids continued fishing from my bridge, acting like they owned the place. About 15 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. After I explained the situation, they walked up to the bridge to confront her. The first officer told her to pack up her things and leave since this was private property. She angrily refused, claiming they had every right to be there. When the officer insisted she start packing up and gently placed his hand on her shoulder to guide her toward the shore, she suddenly slapped his hand away and shoved him with all her might. The officer, caught off guard, stumbled backward and fell right into the lake with a huge splash. She spun around to attack the second officer, but he was ready. When she lunged at him, he grabbed her arm and in one fluid motion flipped her onto the wooden planks of the bridge. She let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed across the lake. The first officer pulled himself out of the lake soaking wet, and both officers restrained her while she thrashed and screamed. Her kids started hitting the officers' legs, but they maintained their composure and professionally handled the situation. The second officer announced her arrest for trespassing, assault on a police officer, and threatening behavior with a weapon. When they led her to their patrol car, she continued screaming about her rights and threatening to sue everyone. The officers called Child Protective Services for her kids, who were still trying to attack anyone who came near their mother. They asked me to come down to the station to give a formal statement, which I agreed to do. Later, I learned she was charged with multiple offenses, including trespassing, assault on a police officer, and threatening behavior with a deadly weapon. She ended up serving 6 months in jail, and her kids were temporarily placed with their father, who apologized profusely for her behavior. The bridge needed some minor repairs from all the commotion, but I reinforced it and installed security cameras to prevent any future incidents. 3 years ago, I was involved in a serious car accident that left me with a spinal cord injury. I spent months in rehabilitation, learning to navigate my new reality. The doctors told me I might never walk again, but they also said I could still live an independent life. They were right on both counts. While I do use a wheelchair, I've adapted my apartment and lifestyle to maintain as much independence as possible. The accident changed everything about how I live, but it didn't change who I am. I still work as a graphic designer from home, still love going to concerts, though that's a whole different adventure now, and still insist on doing things for myself whenever I can. My apartment is on the ground floor of a decent building with good accessibility features, which is a blessing I don't take for granted. Now about today's incident. With Christmas right around the corner, I realized I was missing a few essential items for the holiday dinner I'm hosting for my family. Usually I plan better to avoid last-minute shopping, especially during winter, but this year things got away from me with work deadlines. We just had a massive blizzard on Saturday, and while the city crews have been working non-stop, the sidewalks were still a nightmare. There were snowbanks blocking most of the accessible entrances, and where there weren't snowbanks, there were sheets of ice or deep slush puddles. After trying to navigate the sidewalk for about 10 minutes and nearly getting stuck twice, I had to make the decision to use the road, staying in the bike lanes where possible. When I was making my way down the road toward the store, I kept close to the curb and made sure to wear my bright winter jacket for visibility. I was about halfway to my destination when I heard a car slowing down behind me. A woman started calling out to me, but I ignored her at first, focusing on navigating around a nasty patch of slush. Then she started screaming, asking if I was crazy. She had pulled up beside me and was leaning out of her car window, her face red with what I assumed was self-righteous anger. When I asked her what she meant, she started ranting about what I was doing on the road and if I was trying to get myself killed. I tried explaining that the sidewalks were blocked with snow and ice and I didn't have much choice. That's when she really showed her true colors, saying that people like me should just stay home. Those words got my blood boiling. I'd heard that phrase "people like you" too many times since my accident. I shot back at her, asking if by people like me she meant people who needed to get their shopping done just like everyone else. She then threatened to call the police, claiming I was going to cause an accident. I told her to go ahead and suggested she ask the police where exactly I was supposed to go when the sidewalks were completely inaccessible. I even told her I'm sure they'd love to hear her expert opinion on disability rights. A couple of people who were walking nearby had stopped to watch the scene unfold. One of them, a city worker who had been clearing snow from a nearby bus stop, came over to ask if there was a problem. The woman immediately complained about me wheeling down the middle of the road. The city worker told her that he'd been working in the area all morning and knew the sidewalks weren't properly cleared yet. He explained that I was actually following proper procedure by using the bike lane when the sidewalk was inaccessible. The woman started to sputter, but I cut her off. I asked her if she'd never had to think about how other people navigate the world, or never had to consider that maybe I was out here because I needed to be, not because I wanted to inconvenience her. The city worker stayed next to me, essentially acting as a buffer between me and her car. He then pointed out that she was blocking traffic and suggested she move along. Her face got even redder, if that was possible. As she drove off, she was muttering something about people these days and no common sense. The city worker then checked if I was okay and offered help getting to my destination. I thanked him for stepping in but assured him I could manage. He mentioned they were actually prioritizing the street for better clearing that day, and it should be done by early afternoon. I finished my shopping and made it back home without any more incidents. The city worker was right. By the time I headed back, the sidewalks were much more navigable. I even saw the same crew working on clearing more of the accessible ramps at the crosswalks. What gets me is how some people seem to think that just because I use a wheelchair, I should somehow put my life on hold when conditions aren't perfect. Like I should just sit at home and wait for the world to become completely accessible before daring to go out. That's not how life works. We adapt, we find ways, and we keep going, whether certain Karens approve or not. I've been married to my husband for 15 years, and throughout this time I've managed to maintain a relatively peaceful relationship with my mother-in-law. Sure, she's always been a bit particular with her endless collection of casino merchandise and tendency to overstep boundaries, but I've learned to navigate around her quirks. That is, until this Christmas shopping incident that left me questioning everything. My daughter, who's 12, has been dreaming of becoming a content creator. She's been making little videos using my old phone, editing them, and showing such genuine passion for it. After months of saving and planning, my husband and I decided to get her a proper camcorder for Christmas. It was going to be her big gift, and I was beyond excited about it. That's when my mother-in-law called, asking to meet up for lunch and Christmas shopping. She needed help picking out something for my 9-year-old son. Seemed innocent enough, right? I should have known better. We met at the video game store first. They were out of the game I initially suggested, so I recommended another one. Coincidentally, one I had already bought, but was planning to return to make things easier for her. That should have been my first clue about her shopping behavior. When she questioned my suggestion, I assured her that this was the right choice, explaining how my son had been talking about this game for months. She still seemed unsure and kept pointing at other games, but I stood my ground. Things got weird at the next store. I was picking up some small bonus gifts for the kids' stockings when suddenly my mother-in-law started grabbing items straight out of my cart. When I asked what she was doing, she casually explained that she thought they'd make nice presents and she'd get them instead. I tried warning her that if she kept taking everything I was planning to buy, Santa would look pretty bad this year. She just laughed it off like I was joking. The woman literally reached into my cart multiple times, transferring items to hers without even asking. But I tried to keep my cool. After all, they were just small extras. Then we headed to Best Buy. I was finally going to get my daughter's camcorder, and I couldn't contain my excitement. While browsing, I shared my enthusiasm about my daughter's reaction to the gift. That's when my mother-in-law mentioned having some cameras at home from the casino. I politely but declined, explaining that this was something special we wanted to get her ourselves. She followed me around the store while I picked out the perfect camcorder, standing right there at checkout as I talked about how this was #1 on my daughter's wish list. I even described my plans to wrap it with a special bow and put it right at the back of the tree for Christmas morning. 2 days later, my daughter spent the night at her grandmother's house. When she came home, she was bursting with excitement. She ran in telling me about the presents under her grandmother's tree. Her brother had 7, she had 6, and her grandmother had given her a vlogging camera. She just needed help with the memory card. I immediately texted my mother-in-law, demanding to know why she would buy the camera when she knew it was supposed to be our special gift. Her response was dismissive, saying it was just a kid's toy and she didn't see the problem. When I turned to my husband for support, he was equally dismissive, saying he didn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of it. That's when I snapped. I gathered every single casino prize she'd ever given us, the cheap electronics, the questionable appliances, all of it, and dropped them off at her doorstep with a note. The note explained that since she was so fond of giving away cameras, she could have all these things back to give to someone else. I also told her that I'd returned the camcorder and bought our daughter a laptop instead. My husband wasn't happy about it, but for once, I didn't care. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire, and watching my mother-in-law's face when she opened her door to find her precious casino collection was worth every second of drama that followed. My daughter loves her new laptop even more than she would have loved the camera, and this time, there's no way my mother-in-law can one-up that gift. The following Christmas, I made sure to do all my shopping online. Some lessons you only need to learn once. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.